found that the Kansas Constitution's Bill of Rights protects access to abortion. In response to that decision, Kansas voters will be voting August 2nd. In fact, many of you already are voting early or by mail on a constitutional amendment called Value Them Both that was passed by the legislature to declare that abortion is not a right under the Kansas Constitution. The referendum makes Kansas the first state in the nation to weigh in on abortion following that court decision. Next week's vote in Kansas is just the first example of how the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in the Dobbs case lends additional weight to our own civic engagement. How individuals choose to be civically engaged will determine what the future looks like in this new landscape. So whether you vote, how you vote, who you vote for, how you choose to make your opinion known, or even the extent to which you're willing to engage with differing viewpoints is probably going to have a greater impact on the future in the post-Roe era, with so much being left up to the states for now. Today's discussion is designed to ground you in key arguments being made by the vote yes and vote no sides. It's designed to deepen your understanding of what drives Kansans to engage with such passion on this issue and to start to try to maybe envision a future in terms of what dialogues we should have after August 2nd. We plan to conduct our discussion with a tenor that reflects the principles and competencies of leadership taught by the Kansas Leadership Center, especially the willingness to hold multiple interpretation, even those viewpoints that challenge us or concern us. The program we planned for today has been profoundly shaped by our readers and especially KLC alumni. 700 of them responded to a survey we sent out earlier this month about the issue of abortion. Many of them, and these are people from both sides, shared deeply personal information with me and the rest of our team about why this issue is so important to them. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for your engagement and the trust that you have placed in us to both reach out to us and to be a part of us holding this conversation. I also want to thank you for your guidance. One of the questions we asked on the survey was, what advice do you have for us? And the overwhelming response was, be neutral. And a lot of you also said, and I interpret it being in this tone of voice, good luck. And so we have tried to build this program to honor the desire to create a trustworthy process that engages multiple perspectives in an authentic, truthful way. And it's a tall order, and we would be grateful for any grace that you as an audience can extend us and our panelists as we try to do this. And if we disappoint you at all through the course of this, we hope it's at a rate that you can handle and tolerate. In a few minutes, you're going to hear recorded interviews with two individuals we ask to make the best possible arguments for the vote yes and vote no sides. You'll hear from Elizabeth Kirk, a law professor at Catholic University of America, who will be sharing the viewpoint of the vote yes side. Ashley All, a spokesperson for Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, the coalition opposing the amendment, will speak on behalf of the no side. After that, we'll have a live discussion with 6 panelists with the hope of going beneath the surface to discuss this issue even more deeply. 3 of the panelists plan to vote yes, and the other panelists are planning to vote no. We won't resolve this debate today. I mean, I can pretty much guarantee that. But we hope to embody the value of listening deeply to each other in hopes that there's something good, that there's some benefit that comes to us after August 2nd. We encourage you to engage in this dialogue in the comments throughout, honoring this same spirit of restraint and respect. That doesn't mean you can't criticize or disagree, but I'd urge you to focus on content and give everyone you encounter as much of the benefit of the doubt as you can extend for the course of this hour. And after this hour is over, you can go back to being your normal self, but the goal is to just create this very unique space for this small period of time that might allow us to do something and have a conversation that's different from what we're used to having. I'm going to start off our discussion by reading word for word the question that will appear on the ballot. The goal is to give us a common grounding in what we're voting on, because that's just going to drive so much of our discussion today. Question submitted, constitutional amendment. Vote yes or no. Explanatory statement. The Value Them Both amendment would affirm there is no Kansas constitutional right to abortion or to require the government funding of abortion, and would reserve to the people of Kansas, through their elected state legislators, the right to pass laws to regulate abortion, including, but not limited to, in circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or when necessary to save the life of the mother. A vote for the value them both amendment would affirm there is no Kansas constitutional right to abortion or to require the government funding of abortion, and would reserve to the people of Kansas, through their elected state legislators, the right to pass laws to regulate abortion. A vote against the value them both amendment would make no changes to the Constitution of the state of Kansas and could restrict the people, through their elected state legislators, from regulating abortion by leaving in place the recently recognized right to abortion. Shall the following be adopted? Section sign 22, regulation of abortion. Because Kansans value both women and children, the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion and does not create or secure a right to abortion. To the extent permitted by the Constitution of the United States, the people, through their elected state representatives and state senators, may pass laws regarding abortion, including, but not limited to, laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or circumstances of necessity to save the life of the mother. And then the two options to vote, yes and no. Now that you've had the text of the amendment read to you, you will now have a chance to hear from Elizabeth Kirk and Ashley All to explain the perspectives of both sides.
I'm Elizabeth Kirk. I teach law in the area of law and the family at Catholic University Columbus School of Law, and I direct its Center for Law and the Human Person. I grew up in the Kansas City area, and I was one of the chief witnesses in the legislative hearings on the Value Them Both Amendment.
Hi, I'm Ashley All. I'm spokesperson for Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, the main organization that is opposing the constitutional amendment on the ballot in August. It is actually a coalition of quite a lot of groups, some that maybe people are familiar with, Planned Parenthood Great Plains, ACLU Kansas, Kansas Values Institute, but also we have kind of a broad network of organizations like Kansas the League of Women Voters of Kansas, Women for Kansas, Mainstream Coalition, and then local groups all across the state that are working to stop this amendment and protect constitutional rights here. In 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court found that all Kansans have a right to personal autonomy, which is a kind of broad right to make decisions about their lives, about their bodies, free from government interference. Within that was a right to access abortion. Not an unlimited right, it is a limited right. There are numerous regulations on abortion already on the books, and those are still in place. They did strike down one specific procedure that is used oftentimes to save the life of a mother in a difficult pregnancy situation. And so following that decision in 2019, legislators decided they wanted to put an amendment on the ballot that would remove that right to access abortion. And so in 2020, they actually tried and failed. A bipartisan coalition of lawmakers actually blocked the amendment from going on the ballot. After the 2020 elections, there was some shift in the legislature, and as a result, they were able to put it on the ballot. They were able to pass it with 2/3 majority in January 2021 and put it on the ballot in 2022. And as you know, it's on the primary ballot, which is a little unusual. Something of this magnitude often would go on a general election ballot, but legislators chose to put it on the primary ballot in 2022.
So back in April of 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court, in a case called Hodes and Nauser versus Schmidt, held that our 1859 state constitution has a natural right to abortion in it. And when it did so, when it held that, it did two things that put Kansas law at the extreme end of abortion jurisprudence, even at that time vis-a-vis federal jurisprudence, which at that time was governed by Roe and Casey. Those are the United States Supreme Court decisions. So the two things that the Kansas court did in Hodes that create the need for the amendment are these. First, the Kansas Supreme Court adopted a test. Some of this is legal, terminology, but they adopted this legal standard called strict scrutiny. And that test will now apply henceforth to any law regulating abortion that's challenged in a Kansas court. And under that test, and here I'm referring to the Kansas Supreme Court's own words, that any law relating to abortion will be, quote, presumed unconstitutional. And any law, it's presumed unconstitutional, and it's then subjected to a really intense scrutiny under which the state defending the law will almost always lose. And lawyers colloquially call this test strict scrutiny. They call it strict in theory and fatal in fact. So it shows you it's a really high bar for a law to face. And it's such a high bar that the Supreme Court of the United States actually rejected that test as the right one for abortion cases 30 years ago. They said that abortion involves too many competing interests, especially as the pregnancy develops, and that strict scrutiny wasn't the right test. So the Kansas Supreme Court adopted the most stringent test. And under that test, all existing Kansas abortion laws and any future ones are likely to be struck down. I think it's important to, again, to keep in mind what a vote yes means, right? A vote yes is not really taking a stand one way or the other on abortion policy. The amendment itself is completely neutral on abortion. So I think what a vote yes does is it's kind of a vote of confidence in the people of Kansas to be able to engage one another as they have in the past and to work together to embody in law the abortion policy that they think best reflects the needs and wishes of Kansans. So all it does is it removes this right to abortion that the Kansas Supreme Court found and just return to the people of Kansas the ability to regulate abortion. But if you think of it like a balance or a teeter-totter, right now it's like this, right? The Supreme Court has spoken, and every law is presumed unconstitutional, and once challenged, it will likely be found unconstitutional and struck down, right? And so the value in the Vote Amendment, all it does is restore the balance here. And now we can engage one another, persuade one another, persuade our legislators. If they enact laws we don't like, we can vote them out of office.
So basically, the amendment will give politicians the right to pass any law they want regarding abortion, including a complete ban. There are no exceptions outlawed or outlined in the amendment. But if you read the amendment, it's actually quite confusing. It does say that we are giving our elected leaders control over regulating abortion, but it also mentions abortion, or it mentions rape, incest, and the life of the mother in a way that I think is confusing to some people. They may look at that and think that those specific exceptions are carved out, but in fact they are not. So what the amendment does is eliminates our right to access care and gives that decision power, gives that power to politicians to, again, choose to regulate abortion in any way they want, including a total ban. I should note that abortion is already heavily regulated in Kansas. It is banned after 22 weeks. Government funding of abortion, another thing they mentioned in the amendment, is already outlawed. And there are numerous other regulations, including waiting periods, parental consent, already on the books, not to mention just the regular medical supervision that the Board of Healing Arts gives to all medical facilities, including surgery centers. So there is quite a lot of regulation already on the books, but this allows politicians to go even farther. And that is what we are concerned about. A no vote maintains the common sense regulations and restrictions that are already on the books in Kansas regarding abortion. And it protects our right to make these decisions for ourselves and our families free from government interference. What a yes vote absolutely means is that the door is open to a complete ban. And we've seen in recent news stories and just from a bill that was introduced in the 2022 session, that is exactly where we believe they intend to go. A bill was already filed that bans abortion outright. It has no exception for rape, no exception for incest, and has only a very narrow exception for ectopic pregnancy. No broad, exception to save the life of the mother. And not only that, it criminalizes it and makes it a felony. So we are very concerned that that is where we're headed if this amendment passes. We expect the legislature to move very quickly to ban abortion completely with no exceptions for rape and incest. We've seen that in other states, and we've also seen the consequences. So we are very concerned about that. They have tried to be, coy about their intentions following the vote, but there have been numerous indications over the years, and also just recently about their intentions to ban it completely.
The argument that the value them both amendment would lead to a ban, I think, is an extreme hypothetical, right? I think the best judge of what the people of Kansas would do is the kinds of laws that they have passed in the past. And I think, Kansans typically have passed moderate regulations on abortion that the vast majority of Kansans and Americans agree on. And so, again, I think if you think of it like this balance or this teeter-totter, I mean, is it possible that once equilibrium is restored, some people are going to say, I'd like to ban abortion, right? I mean, yes, that's the United States. We have people all over the spectrum. But the reality is most Americans agree that there should be some restrictions on abortion. And the reality is that right now, there's no ability to have those conversations with one another because the Supreme Court has tilted the balance permanently this way, right? There's no value to discourse or conversation or engaging one another because no matter what we come up with, right, it'll be presumed unconstitutional from the get-go. Why would the legislature even waste their time and resources talking about laws that are going to be presumed unconstitutional? So I think to throw out the specter of a possible ban is really creating fear based on a remote hypothetical that completely ignores the actual reality that we have right now. In order to pass any law, if the balance is restored, in order to pass any law, we have to convince one another.
The majority of voters vote no in August. Abortion will remain heavily regulated. Those regulations and restrictions that are already on the books, banning after viability, government funding of abortion being outlawed, all of those will remain in place. And but people will still be able to access care if they need it in cases of abuse, rape, and in cases when, unfortunately, sometimes pregnancies have life-threatening complications. So really, the no vote is kind of middle ground where you continue to maintain regulations and restrictions, but you're also able to access care when you need it. I think Kansans have a unique opportunity right now to protect our constitutional rights here at home, following the decision to overturn Roe, which stripped people of rights at the federal level. We have a unique opportunity to protect those rights and protect women across the state and make sure that they're able to make these decisions for themselves and their families with their doctor, with their faith leader, and with their support community. This amendment will absolutely mandate government control over our private medical decisions and pave the way for a total ban on abortion in Kansas. And Kansans, by and large, support access to abortion. The vast majority of Kansans believe that there are situations when it is necessary and should be available. And we believe that they will vote no and continue to maintain the regulations that are on the books, but also maintain our constitutional right to access.
Very important to understand, a yes vote is neutral on abortion. It's not tipping it back this way. It's not a personhood amendment or something like that. It's a completely neutral amendment. So it's just a vote of confidence in the people of Kansas to work this thing out. And abortion has, very complex moral and legal questions involved those are exactly the kinds of things that are typically best worked out by legislatures, where we can have expert testimony from physicians or psychologists or whatever the field is. It's important that we talk to one another and learn from one another, and that isn't going to happen under the current HODI's regime. So I think if you want that kind of public discourse, right, that's more likely to lead to a resolution that creates some kind of stability, right, because we've all gotten to participate in it. Then that's what a yes vote is. I mean, a no vote says we don't want to have that conversation, right? We're comfortable with an unlimited, unregulated abortion regime in the state of Kansas, because that's what will happen with the application of this test. I think without value them both, what we'll see eventually is we'll see each of these laws challenged. Most of our laws will be struck down. It will have a chilling effect on any new legislation. As I said, the legislature is going to be reluctant to take up any abortion regulation. I think we'll see, given the telegraphing and the decision, I think we'll see required taxpayer funding, even of elective abortions. And then what we'll see, which we've already seen since 2019, is we'll see the number of abortions creeping up as Kansas becomes what, again, in their words, a haven state, right, for abortion. So abortion's already up 13% in Kansas since HODI's, and that'll just continue. After 50 years of Roe, at least 2 generations of people growing up and living under Roe and Casey, even though, of course, we've had this fraught abortion debate in our country, we really haven't had to talk to each other, right? And I've had so many conversations just in the last few weeks with people that are unsure, that disagree. I think that's really good for us. I think that's really, really good for us to have to talk about the underlying goods that are at stake. Like, why do women have abortions? Why aren't we talking about, the poverty conditions? Why aren't we talking about, the failure of some fathers to support women and their children? Why aren't, all these various questions? Like, I'm so excited that we get to talk to one another. And to your question about what do we agree on, I think most Americans and most Kansans agree that those are causes for concern. And on abortion specifically, most of us agree there as well. Most people are not comfortable with either extreme. Most people are, and so again, I mean, I think what a yes vote does is allow these conversations, the deliberative process, the democratic process, to happen in a way that I think will be really healthy for our democracy and our civil discourse.
I would say we all value life, and we all understand that there are difficult situations in people's lives, and we believe that we ought to help protect women from these situations, and we ought to be able to protect our children if there are situations of rape. And I think that they agree with that as well. My concern is that they put certain, very specific beliefs ahead of those constitutional rights. And women in Kansas deserve the right to make decisions about their health care and their body for themselves and their families. And doctors ought to be able to make these decisions for their patients or with their patients in a timely fashion, especially in situations of emergency. And that is what we've seen since the Roe decision, or the Dobbs decision, where Roe was overturned. We've seen stories out of states that have banned it where a 10-year-old child was required to travel over state line to get an abortion. A victim of rape who was 10 was required to travel to get an abortion because of her state's new laws, and that is absolutely outrageous. Nobody in Kansas agrees that that is the way we should treat our children. And we've seen stories out of other states where women and doctors have had to delay care for women, and it has had serious consequences. And so we are very concerned, especially given their recent statements that they plan to ban abortion completely with no exception for rape and incest, and probably a very narrow exception for the life of the mother. They are the law of the land until further, until somebody were to challenge them. But it's been 3.5 years and no other legal challenges have happened. So I think that is unlikely, despite what the other side says. These laws are in place and enforced. Providers in this state follow them. And another thing to note, some of the language and the messaging from the other side, talking about how Kansas isn't, unregulated, and how Kansas has, so many late-term abortions, that it's absolutely false. Kansas has not had a post-viability abortion, meaning after 22 weeks, in years. There hasn't been one, zero since I think 2018. Okay. So I think it's important to keep all those facts in mind when we're looking at whether this amendment is even necessary, which I would argue it is not. Again, abortion is heavily regulated here. And all this does is open the door for a total ban on abortion with no exceptions, and takes away the constitutional rights of women across the state of Kansas.
There's 4 reasons why I think Kansas laws are likely to be struck down under this test. One is that pro-choice advocates themselves, when HODIES was decided, they said publicly, this means that nearly all abortion restrictions in Kansas are going to be challenged and struck down. The second reason is we can look to other states. There's other states besides Kansas, about a dozen of them, who have similarly adopted or found a state constitutional right to abortion and adopted this strict scrutiny test. And we see in those states, when a court does that, it's the beginning of a long line of cases where moderate abortion restrictions like funding restrictions, parental notice, parental consent, waiting periods, requirements that physicians be the one to perform abortions, those have all been struck down in other states under the same test. The third reason is that Justice Biles, who's one of the Kansas Supreme Court justices who agreed with the result, he agreed there was a right to abortion, he wrote separately to disagree with the strict test the court adopted. He thought the court should adopt a lesser standard. And he specifically said this strict standard was going to have unsettling effects in Kansas law. And then the last thing I would say is that we've already seen that in the couple of abortion laws that have been challenged so far since 2019, lower courts have struck them down, just as we would expect them to do. So, for example, the ban on D&E, dilation and evacuation abortions, commonly called in the statute dismemberment abortions, that law has been held unconstitutional. That law had bipartisan support in the legislature, struck down. The comprehensive abortion clinic licensing, sanitation standards, inspection rules, that law was struck down as well. So that's the background for why the value of them both amendment is required to restore the equilibrium to Kansas law and allow the Kansans through their legislature to enact the abortion policy they think best represents the wishes of Kansans.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Ashley, for sharing your insights with us. And thank you to Julian Montes, who is the producer who created that video for us. Obviously, there are lots of areas where the two of them disagree. And for the course of this hour, the rest of this hour, I would just like you to hold this possibility that what they disagree on mostly is not about the facts, but that they are making different interpretations based on the same facts. And in some cases, maybe even put a higher priority on interpreting some facts over others. And the hope was that by placing them next to each other, we could really see points of convergence and points of divergence that might be informative as we all go out to vote. So now that we've had each side put its best foot forward, I want to turn to our live panel to deepen the conversation. Joining us today are Ben, Catherine, and Ashley, along with Laura, Kayla, and Gloria. We're going to be identifying them only by their first names because sharing your views on this topic is, it's kind of publicly risky. And so we wanted to just make it a little easier to be honest and authentic. And I want to start by giving them a chance to introduce themselves. And I realize, like, when every decision that you make in this discussion is fraught with implications. And I can't even have you guys introduce yourselves in alphabetical order without saying something, because all of our yes votes are ABC and our no votes are elsewhere in the alphabet. So I'm just gonna call you out by name and ask you to briefly introduce yourself and tell us, why did you decide to join this conversation? So I'd like to start with Ashley.
I'm Ashley Stanley, and I just blew the whole anonymity, and I realize that now. I just wanted to join this conversation because I think dialogue is more effective in bringing about change than one-sided social media posts and yard signs. I think a lot is lost in translation with those, and I think it's better to dialogue about it.
Thank you, Ashley. Gloria, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us why you decided to join today's conversation?
Yes, my name is Gloria. I'm a mother of 5, and I wanted to join this conversation because I think it's important that we hear both sides in order to come up with a better solution for Kansas women.
Thank you, Gloria. Ben, your turn.
Thanks for having me. Ben, I'm a lifelong Kansan resident of Wichita, married and father of 2 young boys. I joined this conversation because I care about representative democracy. I care about the discourse that we engage in that makes representative democracy necessary. And most of all, I care about the community, not only that I live in, but that my boys live in and will inherit. And I think that this conversation and mapping out the kind of community we want to live in for human flourishing is really important.
Thank you, Ben. Kayla, what about you? Could you introduce yourself and what made you want to be part of this call?
Yeah, I'm Kayla, and I'm also a lifelong Kansan. I have 3 children. I decided to join this today. I think that it's really important that we do have dialogue and not just hateful, rhetoric, and be able to talk calmly about why we, think the way we do, what viewpoints shape how we vote, and all of that. So I am just ready to share my opinions.
Well, thank you, Kayla. Catherine, could you please introduce yourself and share why you wanted to join our discussion?
Hey everyone, my name is Catherine. I'm a mother of a budding toddler and a wife. I'm an entrepreneur. I was born a Kansan. I've been a Kansan most of my life, but I did live overseas for 4 or 5 years. And I wanted to join this conversation echoing a lot of you all, that it's hard to have these conversations in real life. I feel like sometimes I post stuff on social media trying to not be neutral, but be post calming stuff that I believe. It's not divisive necessarily, but it's an echo chamber, and it's not a place to have dialogue. So I always tell people, if you have something to say to a post, I want to talk to you in real life. I want to get a beer. I want to get a coffee. Let's talk about it face to face. So this is a great opportunity for that.
Well, thank you. And I just want to add, like, that's like kind of why this group was chosen. Like, we wanted to bring individuals on who have both strong opinions, but also the ability to talk across difference. And so you're, not just representing your points of view, you're kind of representing, I hope, the best of Kansans in terms of having this kind of dialogue. Laura, your turn. Introduce yourself and tell us what made you want to join today's discussion.
Thanks, Chris. My name is Laura. I'm also a proud Kansan. I'm a Jewish woman. I'm a mom to an incredible 3.5-year-old daughter. I'm also 17 weeks pregnant, which feels relevant for this discussion. And I'm here because I truly believe really what so many of us have already shared, that so few of our politics live in the polarities and so much more exists in the nuance. And so I'm looking forward to talking with everyone and learning today.
So I'd like to, thank you, Laura. And I'd like to open up kind of to the group with kind of our first deep question. And I'd like to know, like, when you think about voting in the August 2nd election, what is most important to you? And if you can connect that really deeply with like the experiences that have shaped those views, like not just the position, but what's the below the tip of the iceberg, and like what has shaped your views. And I'm just going to open it up and let you kind of work it out. Who talks when and where?
I'll go. So I am a no vote August 2nd. I believe very strongly that all humans should have the right to bodily autonomy. I think that healthcare decisions should be made by the person whose health it is and their doctor, not politicians, not even voters. I don't think that unless you're in those shoes and have lived in those moments, like there's no way you are even have any stake in the game, because it's not your life, it's not your health. There's a lot of misinformation, I think, going around about abortions in general. They're already very regulated in our state. I know personally the regulations because 5 years ago, I was 22 weeks pregnant and I found out that my son, who we named Jack, had a severe fetal anomaly. And so they deemed him incompatible with life. And so what that means is basically, if I would have kept on with the pregnancy, then I could have miscarried, which is more dangerous because it's just spontaneous. You don't know what's going to happen. And also with his severe anomaly that he had, basically, if he would have made it through birth, he would have just suffered every second, minute, maybe a day, until he died. And so I said, I have children, and my job as a mom, I feel, is to protect my kids and make sure that they have the best life that they possibly can. And so when we found this out about our son, I just couldn't imagine him going through that with just, the little life that he had just being pain and suffering, because there was nothing medically they could have done to help him. And so since I was already 22 weeks in our state, that's too late to have an abortion. You have to have 24 hours before to get counseled. Then you have to have the procedure. And at that point, I had to give birth to him. So it was 4 to 5 days, and then you have the follow-up. So that window is it's not just like a day, it's actually a pretty, at least a week. So it was too late to do it here. So we had to travel to another state. There was only, I think, 5 places, and this was 5 years ago, that you could go. I didn't have any funding from the government. It was actually Kansas Abortion Fund that helped us to pay for the abortion, but then we also had to fly, stay a week, leave my kids here, not work, all of that. And also the place that I went, they had to go over my file to make sure that it was actually a medically necessary procedure for our son. So it's not like they're just going to do any abortion because somebody is like, oh, I don't want to, have this baby. They're doing this for women and families like myself who had to make the horrible choice that I did. But I think that only I could have made that choice. I don't think that anyone, unless you've been in that situation, can possibly even understand the pain and suffering that I had to go through, that I still go through. So I just think that it's really important that, more stories are out there, just with what women are dealing with on a daily basis. And, not just mine, but everyone's is valid, and it's their reason because they're living it, and they have to, go through the traumatic experience of, all of these things. So I just think that's why I'm so very strongly a vote no.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss, and thank you for being willing to share your story.
Thanks.
Who would like to speak next?
Yeah, I'll go. Thank you, Kayla, for sharing that. I appreciate learning your perspective. So the experience that I've had with this happened when I was 19. My best friend at the time got his girlfriend pregnant. And she, with pressure from her mother, was going to get an abortion. It was very much contra the stories that you typically hear. He reached out to her several times, offered to marry her, offered to obviously support her. His parents reached out to her, offered to support, said, we'll adopt the baby. You can walk away entirely if you want nothing to do with the baby. Really just went leaps and bounds. And she went ahead and did it anyway. Didn't consider the fact that he was the father of this child at all. And it absolutely crushed him. He was devastated by it. And had very long-term effects for him. And being his best friend, I walked with him through that difficulty and see what it did to him. I said, also saw what it did to her and the people around them. And it was very traumatic for everybody involved. And so that's kind of the initial experience I've had. I've had others walk with friends through difficulty, certainly not naive at all to the difficulties that people face and that women face at this. I want to make that very clear. I don't know. It's interesting that a majority of people who call themselves pro-life are women, women who have had children, many of them through complications and things. They're not naive to this. But I also think, watching the videos was instructive to me. I think there's just a lot still, some misinformation. Yes, it is true that there are regulations currently on the books. But you have to understand the context of this conversation and why the amendment is even important in the first place. Because the HODIS ruling of 2019 was one of the most extreme rulings that we've seen, not just in a state Supreme Court, but even in the national Supreme Court. Just to very briefly, and Professor Kirk didn't list this, but we have the strict scrutiny standard given in the HODIS ruling, which mimics that of Roe itself. But in the Roe ruling, Justice Blackmun gave a legal framework, our trimester framework, first, second, third trimester, which we look at now, to say when the federal government, when state governments have a compelling interest to regulate this. The first trimester, strict scrutiny, no regulation at all. Second trimester, a little bit just in terms of for the health of the mother. The third trimester, the state does have more of a compelling interest to do this. What's so radical about HODIS is that they adopted the strict scrutiny standard, but gave absolutely no legal framework whatsoever. So it's presumed that the state never has a compelling interest to deal with this. So the laws that have already been challenged, one being the second trimester D&E, which was in the HODIS ruling, a subsequent ruling on health and safety standards for abortions have both been struck down. It's not true to say that there's not a case right now. There is one pending. It's stayed right now with the court to see how the amendment's going to go with the Trust Women Clinic v. Bennett, which is trying to overturn laws to allow women to obtain abortion pills with just using telemedicine without the consultation of a doctor. There's all kinds of problems to that we could go into. So it's just not true. And we have all the evidence in the world based off of what we've seen with other states, that when these laws are challenged, and we have every good reason to believe that they will be challenged and are being challenged now, they will be struck down. The bottom of page 72 of the majority ruling says presumed unconstitutional. Existing laws that are challenged will be struck down. And we, as the people, will have no recourse whatsoever through our elected representatives to change any of that going forward. It will completely take it out of our hands.
Thank you, Ben. Gloria, it looks like you're having to do a lot of maneuvering around, and I know, I think you might have some time crunch going on. So I wondered if you'd like to go next and talk about when you think about voting in the August 2nd election, what is most important?
Yeah, I apologize for that. We do have class, but we send everybody to lunch, but yet everybody came back right away. So
yeah,
that's why I was moving around. My vote is also no. And I appreciate the last two persons that went and spoke about why they consider however they're going to vote. My reasoning is I too had to have I guess I wasn't that far along, so I had to have a DNC. And so to even imagine what a woman could possibly go through physically to obtain an abortion. I mean, mine was a missed abortion, actually. I didn't know that my baby had passed, and it had been over 4 weeks. So I also work as a paramedic. So my first thought in mind was becoming septic and becoming ill and leaving my other children behind, right? And so at that time, that's what was going through my mind, is how would I survive if I became septic? And if I didn't, what was going to happen to my children, right? So there I am changing up beneficiaries, and then to top that off with the possibility of a physician saying, no, we can't do it because this law has been passed. To me, that is actually very dreadful. Are there other examples of women that decided that they did not want to continue with the pregnancy, like the previous gentleman said his friend's girlfriend did? I understand, but I think most importantly is being able to keep safe and healthy those women that need it medically. And unfortunately, that also includes the women who perhaps don't want to continue with the pregnancy. There's so many cases. El Salvador, for example, which has a total ban on abortion. Most of the women in the prison system are there because they couldn't prove that they had a miscarriage, and they're charged right away with an abortion. And so what does that do? That leaves the other children that they have back at home alone. Who raises those children? And I think that's also a huge factor that leads to society being ran in a poor manner, is because you're incarcerating mom. I mean, worst case scenario, obviously, incarcerating mom, taking her away from the home because she couldn't prove that it wasn't an abortion, that it was a medical necessity. I couldn't prove that. I didn't even know that my baby had died. So if they wanted to charge me with I killed my baby, I had no proof to show to them that I didn't, other than my word, right? Maybe some lab work. I mean, I wouldn't have taken anything, but ultimately, I really think that we're taking a step back when it comes to being a society that should be more advanced than third world countries. And so that is why my vote will be no this August 2nd.
Well, thank you, Gloria, and thank you for being willing to share that with us all. Who would like to speak next?
I'll go.
I can go, unless someone else says. When I think about voting, the most important thing to me is protecting the rights of the unborn. My biological grandmother gave birth to my mom at 16, and it was not her choice to get pregnant, but it was forced on her during a date. And if she had chosen abortion, my mother would not have been born, and consequently myself and my 3 children would not have been born either. And nobody forced her to keep the baby. It wasn't a lifetime decision that she had to try to raise this child, but she gave us a chance to live. And it's now positively impacted 3 generations of women. And so my vote will be yes.
Can I bring something else into the conversation?
Yes, if you wish.
Yeah. So my question to her response would be, how can you miss something that you wouldn't have? So you're saying that your mom wouldn't have been here and you wouldn't be here. So how can you miss it if you wouldn't have had it? Does that make sense?
How can I miss life if I hadn't known that it existed, if I hadn't been born?
Right. How would you?
I don't know if that's a fair question to ask, because I do have that experience. I do have the experience of life. I know what it is, and I know that it exists. And I'm glad that I wasn't just seen as a choice, that my mother wasn't just seen as a choice, but she was seen as a life.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, this is Laura. Like, I want to validate, Ashley, listening to your story, it totally makes sense to me that would be your line of thinking. That makes complete sense to hear you talk about the generations and, and that you were the benefit of that choice, of the choice to honor, for your grandmother to honor the life that was growing in her. And it makes a lot of sense to me to hear that. And I, on the other hand, sort of think about, I'm a geriatric social worker by training, and I've heard just the harrowing stories of botched abortions pre-Roe v. Wade. And, Gloria, you mentioned sepsis, and it had happened to many of my clients. I mean, I've heard whispered words from my most devoutly Catholic clients of their partners, cheating on lunch breaks and bringing home venereal disease and having to deal with that, right? Having to deal with the hard things. And you're right, the hard choices that come up in life. And so part of the reason that I'm voting no is I know, and I've heard, and I've borne witness to so many of those stories of lost friends, of lost siblings, they've told me, I've heard with my own ears, going up to a hotel room, meeting someone they didn't know credentials for. And I think, I hear all of the concern for life, and my concern is also for life. And I'm concerned that if this passes, I'm really concerned for the lives of women who will be seeking abortions. And so I would say to Ben and Catherine and Ashley, I really genuinely honor your perspective, and you can change hearts and minds. Ben, when we were orienting, said the most sincere and honest thing, which I loved. Ben, you were like, I'm here to change hearts and minds, right? I'm here to change people's perspective. And I was like, I don't pretend to change anyone's perspective, but I think that's an awesome mission to Ashley, to tell your story and to make sure people know that. And Ben, to say all these incredible legal precedents that you're talking about and to help people know that there are options. And I'm totally for options, but I'm totally terrified of a land where women don't see that there are options. And I know that it will lead, because I know that it did in the past. I know in my heart of hearts that it will lead to dead women. And I'm worried about the sanctity of life too, just sort of from a different angle, I think, based on my experiences.
I appreciate that. And let me just say that if Laura and I lived in the same town, I think we would be great friends. And I know we need to get Catherine in here, and I want to respect that. I do want to just make a distinction that what we are talking about in elective abortions are different than ectopic pregnancies or septic uteruses or those types of things. And I think that distinction has got to be made. There is a difference between saving the life of the mother, which has an unintended consequence, and not even in every instance. There have been successful instances with ectopic pregnancies of saving the baby, but doing that versus an elective intentional abortion of ending the pregnancy for that reason. And I don't have time. We can go into all kinds of different statistics. I absolutely take very seriously, very sincerely, the stories of women with extreme difficulties. All of these things, absolutely. But I want to say that I think when you look at all the national statistics, even the local statistics, and this comes from the Guttmacher Institute, which is the National Pro-Abortion, Pro-Choice Research Institute, to make certain instances of complications the normative experience in which we base all policy, I think is a mistake. Not to say you don't take them seriously, not to say that we don't listen to every story behind them, and that we need to make really careful sure that we are devising policy in a way that makes those exceptions and has those things. But to make, like Ashley gave the instance of the 10-year-old girl, which there's all kinds of debates flowing around that, to somehow make that a normative instance on which you base all on an issue that's so polarizing, and to take that out of the hands of people, where at least half the country says, no, we want it this way and the other way. And for judges just to take all of that out of our hands to end the conversation entirely, I think is a huge mistake.
I'm going to interject too, because you said that, miscarriages and different things weren't considered abortions. They are actually considered abortions. And so statistically, if you have a miscarriage, if you have to get a D&C for some reason, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, they're medically coded abortions. So it's actually under it's
a semantics game, and I understand what you're saying, but there's a difference in intentionality with the law. Based from an ectopic pregnancy or a miscarriage, based off of that, and then going to have an intentional way to end the pregnancy. So yeah, they may be coded the same, but we're not talking about medical coding. We're talking about intentionality and the way in which you devise policy and how we hammer that out as a society. And so in regards to the law, all the existing regulations that are on the books now make those exceptions. There's national laws that make those exceptions. President Biden's executive order from 2 weeks ago references the national laws that make those exceptions. And so it's very much a distinction that has got to be made between medical coding and policy.
So I don't think we're going to resolve this difference. No. I think we've made these differences clear. We've made these perspective differences quite clear. And I want to take our last 2 minutes and I want to turn them over to Catherine. And you get maybe a different assignment than everyone else gets. So I would like to hear about, what you're thinking about voting in the election. I want to know what experiences have shaped your views. I want to know maybe how, listening to these different viewpoints, what's rattling around in your head. And then maybe you can be the one who sort of expresses what are our hopes for the future after August 2nd? Just from what we've surfaced so far, there's no
not putting any pressure on me. Sorry,
no pressure. This is Catherine. This is why you go first.
Oh gosh. So, I've been pro-life my whole life. There wasn't any early thing that shaped my decision. It's how I was raised. I was raised to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. And not just in this issue, but just in life in general. And so I feel like the unborn are fully human, should have rights that we consider just like everyone else. And yes, we need to take that into consideration, the mother's rights. And we're in this really hard decision where there are mothers that have incredibly difficult decisions to make. I wasn't ever at a point where my own doctor, when I had my first child, this wasn't a consideration for us, but from about 2 weeks after conception, because I already knew I was pregnant, I started to have complications. I had a lump growing. I ended up having a very, very difficult pregnancy, which ended up with my daughter being born 2 months early and us staying in the hospital for a month and a half with her. And so there is some aspect of me that does understand a pregnancy that is terrifying and difficult. And through that, I was actually there was moments where I was I thought when I became pregnant, being pro-life my whole life, I was I'm just going to instantly bond with my child. And I'm going to know that it's fully human, because I did logically, but I understood, like, while it was, especially with my complications, like what I saw as a baby bump was actually just fibroids. And so there was a lot of disconnect with my pregnancy, and it wasn't till she was almost born that I could really connect. So I could kind of empathize with, like, and this isn't everybody. So that some women like yourself, Kayla, and I'm so sorry that you went through that. Like, you wanted your child and you wanted the best for him and you didn't want him to suffer. But there are a lot of other women out there who make these decisions for socioeconomic purposes, and many women who change their mind because they see their ultrasounds and they realize, like, this is a baby that I need to give a chance, and I need to take care of this child the best I can. There are so many social issues that are wrapped up in abortion, and whether it's from, like, our society almost basically requiring both parents to be full-time working to even support a family, that's a problem. The fact that we are a country where our maternal health is worst in developing countries, that's a problem. The fact that we have so many issues, not good paternity and maternity leave, all of these contribute to women's choices and their choice to have an abortion. And I would just like us to be able to continue to have these conversations after August 2nd. It's obvious from the two people we heard and all of us that our interpretations of the laws are very different, and we're not seeing the interpretation the same. But no matter what, I want us to continue to have the conversation, and I want us to be open to each other, and not just assume that the other side is stupid, that we don't see, like, that we hate women, or that the people who want to have, like, abortion available don't love babies. You know, I want us to be able to meet in a respectful way, and I want us to also look at our whole lives and to look at how not just our, like, slimline view of abortion, like what our view is there, but, like, how does all of our choices in life reflect, like, our cohesion? Like, if we're pro-life, are we pro-life in all ways? If we are pro-choice, are we taking these standards that we're putting on other people onto ourselves in every way of our life to help our society, so we get to a place where women don't feel, we get to a place where women feel supported to be, so they don't feel pushed into a corner to choose abortion, no matter what the law says.
Well, thank you, Catherine. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your stories today. I really appreciate it. And I believe our audience is deeply grateful to you. And you definitely exemplified what I think is probably the best dialogue I've ever heard about this issue. And so we have a vote on August 2nd. And I guess, like, my ask for you as voters is that as you go in and you make your decisions, it probably won't change your mind, but keep these 6 stories in mind and the differences in them and the connections that we built today. And hopefully we'll be able to have a conversation together after the vote that's as enriching as this one was today. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for being a part of building a public square for all to lead. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.